Hey, Ryan, this is David. Let me ask you a couple questions. If you were paying more taxes than you had to, would you want someone to tell you that you're paying more taxes than you had to?
Yes.
And so if you paid more taxes in the past, would you want them to tell you how to get your money back?
Yes, and then how to go get it.
And how to go to get it. I don't know what kind of titles you put on this thing, but we should probably label this discussion between you, me, and Jodi as friends don't let friends overpay their taxes.
Yeah, I'd say that would be a good friend that would not let me do that. And I think with this new Job Act and all the stuff all the confusion that's going on right now, I think you two are going to be able to provide a lot of insights on what's going on, and specifically your guys' roles within that act. But maybe for the listeners, let's just give a little bit of background, Jodi and David, on where you guys came from and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Wow. Well, again, Ryan, be careful asking two salespeople that question. We're going to spend the whole hour talking about ourselves. All right, Jodi, make it quick.
Yep. Well, we're with a national engineered-based company, Cost Segregation Services Incorporated, been around since 2001. I've been with the company for going on 8 years, and my degree is in nuclear medicine. Wow. And I love helping people save money.
That's excellent. So, Ryan, the other part of that is you got a mechanical engineer talking about taxes. So we're going to lose this audience pretty quick if we don't give them something of benefit, right? So it's not about me. It's about the people that are listening in. So Ryan, I talk to CPAs all over the country all week long. The questions that they're getting from their clients: how do these new tax codes, the new Tax Cut and Jobs Act, how's that going to affect me? And what do we need to start doing now to take advantage of the new rules? Because there's a brand new game. There's new rules to the game, so we've got to play the game differently. So,
and the game is what's interesting too is because I had and I think some of the listeners would know that I interviewed an EY Ernst & Young one of the lead tax guys, and we did a big broad brushstroke, but you guys approach this from a very specific angle, which is why even a lot of the CPAs don't understand necessarily what you're doing. But I think, all of the different areas that the game has changed in a lot of different fronts, from the businesses, from personal taxes, from real estate, and you guys fit a very specific role. So maybe Jodi or David, one of you guys take up, what is it that's specific that you're doing that impacts the taxes that the listeners might be paying?
Ryan, we're not going to be as nearly boring as that guy was in doing that. I haven't heard him, but we're talking about real dollars. So we want to convey to people, here's how you reduce the amount of taxes that you're paying. Here's what you need to do to take advantage of these new Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts if you're a commercial building owner. So let's limit the conversation to, do you have a commercial building? Are you thinking about buying a commercial building? Are you looking to sell your business in 4 or 5 years? What do we do now to prepare for that in relationship to the commercial building and what we do with that? So it's pretty simple where people can take advantage of this if they make the one right decision between, do I do straight line depreciation or do I do cost segregation depreciation? It depends on which method you choose. And if you choose the wrong one, straight line depreciation, the wrong one. If you choose a cost segregation method, there's all these new tax deductions that are available to you if you know how to take advantage of them. So that's what we're going to talk about. Let's see how to take advantage of these new regulations by employing a cost segregation model for depreciation of the commercial buildings.
Well, and probably, Ryan, if they're just listening, they're probably wondering, what is a cost segregation study? What does it consist of? So what it basically is we are going to be accelerating the depreciation of different building components and systems within the building. When you straight line commercial building 39-year or residential, which would be 27.5-year, everything's on the same playing field as far as getting a little bit of depreciation over that time period. What we do is we're able to come into that building and break out bits and pieces, so to speak, and to be able to put them into 5, 7, or 15-year category. So you're able to use your money now instead of having to wait. So the point is cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. and what can we do with this? And the reason this is such a big point right now, and CPAs know all about this. This is not something new. It's been around since 1997. They are just typically not able to document and give calculated defendable numbers for a particular building component or system, but they will apply the numbers we provide on the taxes, and then they will use them with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act to get more money for their clients, but they don't have anything defendable. And that's what the IRS wants, is documentation, documentation, documentation. They don't care what the number is. How did you get it? And show us how.
Well, and what I think is so funny when Jodi, you and I first met, is that like, it's almost so like duh, right? So you're going to take all of the stuff that's in a building. Yeah. So the building, you might want to depreciate for 39 years, but like, who says the carpet lasts that long, or the light bulbs, or all this other stuff? So it actually makes a lot of logical sense that you would have different schedules for those things. So, and you know, for just to put some really wrap some serious common sense around when you say more money faster and now, can you kind of just explain? I mean, I know we're kind of getting to probably 101 of depreciation, but like, how is that actually happening? David, you want to tee it up to that?
I'm going to back up again and go back to the duh factor here. Let's make this even easier on. I use the Big Mac analogy. So in describing a Big Mac, you know, how do you describe it? Do you say it's a hamburger, or do you say it's, Ryan, do you know it?
No, I don't actually.
2 whole beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, and a sesame seed bun.
Man, there you go. So
all I can think of it, I don't know if you're familiar with Mitch Hedberg. He's got a joke about sesame seeds. That's the only other. Anyway.
All right. So all the baby boomers are grinning in their cars, and all the millennials are going, what the hell was that?
That's
the power of 40 years of advertising. Okay, so I give that analogy to say you can describe that as a whole, as a hamburger, or you can describe a Big Mac as its parts and pieces. And so that's the difference between straight line depreciation, which describes the building as a whole, and therefore you depreciate that building as a whole over 39 years or 27 and a half years. It's a long time. Or you can describe that building to the IRS in its parts and pieces, to break that up and do a study to give value to all those parts and pieces. And then the IRS lets you depreciate some of those parts faster. Jodi said 5, 7, 15-year basis. So you get your deductions up front versus waiting a long time. So it's equivalent to doing, you know, your taxes with the 1040 EZ form, where you get no deductions, straight line depreciation. Or if you do some work, let a cost segregation professional do the work and break that building up and value it in its parts and pieces, then you're eligible for these deductions. For instance, with the new Tax Cut and Jobs Act, when someone buys a new building or builds a new building in 2018 and beyond, or for the next 5 years, they'll be able to depreciate maybe 15 to 30% of that building in the first year. So it's called 100% bonus depreciation for the parts and pieces that we identify that qualifies for that. So that's huge. $1 million building, you're going to get, you know, quite a bit of cash flow, $50,000 to $80,000 in that first year of depreciation. Or, you know, you could default to looking at the building as a whole, and you might get, you know, 6,000. Which do you want?
And I think if we can even throw, and I think it's fantastic analogy of the Big Mac and all the parts and pieces, because all the parts and pieces are different in a building, but like even throwing some numbers on there so for practicality purposes, so if we got $100,000 worth of windows, because you've put a value to all that, and that's where I think your engineering background comes in, right? You put a value to all of those different parts and pieces. So that $100,000 over 39 years versus that $100,000 over 5 or whatever the windows are. I'm just making it up right now.
And bad analogy because they're 39, but that's okay. You're not in the business.
Right. That's what you guys are here for.
That's why you need us.
So whatever that $100,000 that's over 39, when you smush it up front, there's more deductions you can. So you're taking, instead of that payment over a long period of time, or that depreciation, you're smushing up front and offsetting that against profits. Correct?
Right. And so I was just going to give them some numbers.
To use a carpet analogy, when you buy a new building, you can depreciate on the carpet in the first year under 100% bonus depreciation. When you do a renovation, you'll be able to depreciate all that carpet in the first year. So those are some of the examples. So Jodi, give some examples of buildings on what the cash flow might be in certain situations.
Right.
Some examples.
Well, and I wanted to, so people listening here, so for every $500,000, as David mentioned, your tax benefit's going to be somewhere between $20,000 and $70,000, depending on what the building's used for and what type of components are in it. And we will do a no charge, no obligation analysis, which I'll get into a little bit later. So when, like for an example, I just did an Ace Hardware. Most people know about Ace Hardware. This guy, well, he has two Ace Hardwares. Let's say one of them he's owned for like 7 years, and it was like a $540,000 building. His tax benefit on that was like $39,548. He just built like a $2 million Ace Hardware last year. His tax benefit on that was like $120,000. I just did a hotel, like a $38 million hotel, and we came in, I don't know if you knew about that one, David, but we came in actually $700,000 more than anticipated. So his tax benefit was over $2.7 million. So we're talking a lot of money. And how, for your listeners, what do they do with that money? So basically, if we, easy numbers, let's just say $100,000. If you owe $100,000 in taxes this year, you don't write a check to the IRS. It's cash flow. What can you do with that $100,000? If you only owe $50,000 this year for a tax year, you don't lose it. You don't pay anything this year. Then next year, it's just, I call it in the holding queue, and they don't pay any taxes the next year until it runs out. It used to be for 20 years, but with the new tax jobs law, it's now to infinity. So that, like David mentioned,
that's a perfect analogy, Jodi. And I think maybe even to clarify, when you're talking about those different numbers of the ACE and the hotel and stuff, is it's not additional money that so they're not getting $2.4 million in extra money for many. They're getting their money now, right? So you're able to do it. So is that a clarifying question? Does that make sense?
That is correct. That you're using your money now to do something. Do you buy more equipment? Do you buy another, restaurant? Do you, or build another hotel, or do you pay it off, or do you buy more equipment? Do something with their money. An analogy that a lot of people seem to like, that's easy to remember. If I ask you won $1 million, Brian, in a lottery, and I asked you, do you want a little bit of it every year for 39 years, or do you want a bulk of it right now? Well, you want a bulk of it right now because it's time value money. A dollar's worth more today than it will be tomorrow. So you definitely want to use your money. Instead of giving the IRS an interest-free loan, you're giving yourself one. And
maybe that's leads right into the perfect question of why does the IRS let you do this? Why are they letting this happen, or why do they want it to happen?
So what Congress did was they're trying to stimulate the economy, so they're trying to reduce people's taxes. So what this is doing is, for the commercial building owner, they're creating more deductions. So what this accelerated depreciation is giving the commercial building owner more deductions. Therefore, as you're asking, Ryan, therefore he has more cash flow because he has less profit because he's, greater tax bill. So therefore, that's what they're doing to try and stimulate the economy, is to make it to where, you're getting your depreciation deductions faster. You're getting the cash, you're putting that back into the economy, and over time that money is going to grow into the economy. And hey, they're not giving you these deductions. This is basically an interest-free loan from the government, in that there's recapture. You got to give this back at some period of time, when you sell the building, and we'll talk about exit strategies for people in their buildings, or how to mitigate some of that recapture. But this is, again, an interest-free loan from the government. So it's not free money. We'll talk about some situations where it is, but it's getting more deductions now versus in the future. So in the next 5 years or so, we have 100% bonus depreciation. We have Section 179, which if you do put on a new roof or HVAC, you can write that off. So they're trying to get you to spend money, buy things, stimulate the economy, and in time you'll pay that money back.
Another point on that too. So when you do a cost segregation study, you just got $100,000. Well, maybe now I'm going to do improvements to my building, or I'm going to add on to my building. So you do a cost segregation study, you get the benefit, then you also can use what's called, we won't get into it too much, but repair regulations in your favor. But now you put under $200,000 into your building, you have us come back out and we'll cost seg the improvements that you did to your building. And it's not a one-time thing either for just your listeners either. If you do a cost segregation study on a building and I sell it and or I die and someone inherits it or whatever, it starts over at the new appraised value, and we do the same building, new person, new owner, new study.
Well, and I think it's just so interesting because now you've got at least a benchmark for all the stuff. So if you do it once, now you've got a schedule of how much everything's actually worth in your building. Like, duh, again. So, maybe going back to the recapture, David, because I know we're going to get into kind of how this correlates towards exit options of the buildings or the businesses and the different transition scenarios. But I think a lot of people are scared of recapture because what happens is a lot of business owners are like, oh, I'm going to sell my company. And then they go and they kind of run these numbers, and the CPA, after the fact is running some of their net proceeds calculation. Like, holy crap, by the way, depreciation recapture is going to be ordinary income on your plant and equipment. And all of a sudden the numbers break and they can't sell because they're not going to make enough money. So I think there's probably some fear behind, well, this is just going to accelerate the problem that I'm going to have anyways. So can you explain how that should be viewed in your situation?
Sure. And so if they employed straight line depreciation building as a whole, that's typically recapture rate is 25%. On these new deductions that we're getting under the new tax code and Jobs Act, and on items that we accelerate depreciation on, the recapture rate is at ordinary income. So for some people, you're high net wealth guys, that's going to be somewhere around 37%. So you're right. We do have to be careful that there is a higher rate of recapture when the building is sold. One of the things that we also need to be aware of is, I use the example of carpet. When you sell your building 10 years from now, what is 10-year-old carpet worth? Well, it's worth little or nothing. It's a salvage value. So we apply a higher rate to something that's at a salvage value now. So there's a lot of strategies when you're selling your building, how you categorize that, how you value that building to minimize some of that recapture. So there's some strategies to do that. So they're really not going to pay a higher rate, more than likely, on the majority of these items that we're accelerating. So, but it's something to be aware of. Is there going to be a 1031 exchange? Is it going to go into a trust? We'll talk about some of those things. But it can be a higher rate. More than likely, the effective rate is going to be somewhere around what they're already paying. So the question, though, is what can you do with the money? Where are you going to put this? Ryan, my story is I work with two types of clients. Those that are running towards gold medals, that know that every nickel I can get my hand on and reinvest it, I'm going to make a large percentage. And those that are running away from German Shepherds, where they can't find any money. I need to pay my taxes. How in the hell am I going to do this? Wait a minute, you're going to get all this money that I've overpaid? Sure, I'm going to. They don't care what the recapture rate is. If I can keep them afloat and they can pay their taxes this year, I'm in. That's whether you're running towards gold medals or running away from German Shepherds, I work with people that are running their businesses and running them hard. That's who's interested in it.
Well, and so I'm stealing that analogy, by the way. So what would be the triggering event? So if I'm an owner and I've got a building, I either have owned it for a long time and do I do this, or I've got remodeled. What are the triggering events? When and how does this scenario fit into the picture?
I think I think maybe the process is what we should say first so they understand. Anyone that owns a building is a candidate, definitely. Anyone that leases current tax year, we can help as well. So it's a very simple process, and I want for building owners and for CPAs or financial advisors, whoever listening to, we make your life easy. We do all the heavy lifting. So we need a depreciation schedule, and or if they just bought or built what they bought or built it for, the cost, and what's the building used for. We'll run a no charge, no obligation analysis, I'll have numbers back to you within 48 hours that will show you what your predictive tax benefit's going to be and what the cost of the study is going to be. If the numbers look good and it makes sense, Then we do what's called a site survey. We come and look at the building inside out, take pictures. We ask if they have appraisals and blueprints. That's it. Then we take it and we have it for 6 to 8 weeks. They go through and they get everything calculated, and we come back with a finished study for them to apply to their taxes.
Well, I think is so interesting is that everybody should technically do it, which is there's so many services out there where it's like, oh, these are the times that you wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? I think the biggest takeaway is that it doesn't really matter, because whether you've owned them for a long time, you can still have this, whether you're pre-planning for something else or you're remodeling, all the different scenarios, as long as your business is making money, essentially, and as long as then there's a way to figure this out.
Well, I say, and maybe David has a different, I say there's 2 things. There's no negatives to doing a cost segregation study. The only reason you wouldn't want to do one, number one, if you don't pay any taxes, then there'd be no point to it. And number 2, if you're going to take the 100,000 or whatever amount we get you an additional cost seg tax benefit and put it in your desk drawer, don't do it, because there's no point. You're supposed to take the money and do something with it to benefit yourself or your business or your family, whatever it might be.
And the third scenario, Ryan, which you're trying to allude to, is the how long have you owned the building? So if you've owned your building for 20, 30 years, you've depreciated most of that building already. So the remaining basis is not there. So when's the best time to cost segregate a building? When you first buy it, because do you want to get your money back from the IRS, or do you never want to send it to them in the first place? And so when you first buy a building, that's the best time. At the 5-year mark, if you've owned your building for about 5-6 years, that's the maximum return, in that we go back and simply adjust your method of accounting. And therefore, that's going to be the maximum cash flow at the 5-year mark. And then once you get past that at 10 years, let's look and see. Let us run the numbers. At 15 years, we've made buildings that they've owned them for 20 years. The cash flow was there. So it just depends. We'll take a look at it. Jodi will run the numbers for you, and we'll know what the actual predictions are. And then you and your tax professional can make a secure financial decision on that. But once you start getting out, maybe 10, 12 years or so, we need to start looking at that hard. What are you going to do with that money? How bad do you need it? Because we say it's an interest-free loan from the government. You're having to pay me a closing cost to do all the paperwork, essentially, to get that money. And then you have to pay it back at some period of time.
Well, I think what's interesting, and then so we can kind of roll into, okay, so now we've kind of got a pretty good overview of how this fits and why you would do it and the different benefits. And then you start to think about, okay, so in that scenario, let's say you've owned it for a long time, this kind of gets into what's the ultimate goal with the building or the business, because this is how you're planning and juggling the annual cash flow with your ultimate end goal is going to be important. Because, and maybe we can kind of talk about and we can bounce around if we want, but the maybe internal family transition of a building or something of that nature, where, you said, we had talked, I've got clients where they've owned the buildings for a long time. It's a significant, value of the real estate, but they've owned them forever. So there's this whole estate planning that you can do with the kids and the trust, because a trust is a new entity, right? So it maybe kind of, give it 2 cents on how that happens with the step up in basis, kind of that whole transition of the buildings, how that works.
I would say typically a lot of times if they've owned the building too for a long time, that they've done something to the building. So how much have they put into it? I mean, are we able to cost seg, if I have an apartment building, I'm doing stuff all the time. So have I put in, over 100,000 over the last 20 years? Probably. So even though the cost basis of the original building might not have value to do a cost seg study, what you've done to the building, we may be able to find more money. And that's why we look at everything, and it doesn't cost anyone anything to have us look at it to see what we can find. And then if the internal switching to a trust or to another family member, that becomes a whole new entity for the trust or the new family member. So then it starts at the appraised value at that time, because many times I'll have somebody tell me, I bought this building for $300,000, but it's worth $1 million now, Jodi. And it's like, well, that's great, but we have to use that for $300,000 for you. But now when David sells his building to Ryan or gives it to the trust and it's worth $1 million, we start over at that $1 million basis.
So, so, so that's something that we need to discuss, Ryan. Is when you're exiting your building, how's this going to affect things? One of the things, if you plan on selling your building in the next 3 years, cost segregation is probably not good for you because this is a time value of money strategy. So I'm getting you an interest-free loan from the government. You're only going to have to use the money for the next 3 years. What are you doing with that? So it may not make sense if you're going to make those transitions. So you asked about.
Can I interject just for a minute? Because I think, this is where I think, the collaboration of the strategies is potentially extremely valuable because, a lot of the business owners own the buildings. And so technically in terms of just the building and the rent potentially, but if I've got money and this is where I think, the collaboration also with the CPAs is the tax planning as an individual. If we have money coming in and how the entity structure is all lined up, we might be able to do money, take that $100,000-$200,000 and be able to do things within the business or certain other things to get a rate of return on that. When David, you and I were chatting offline, and if I were to able to put $100,000 into my company right now, there's value building strategies of recruiting and hiring executives or certain things that I could potentially get $500,000 to $1 million more for my business because I'm doing certain things. So I think there's just looking at the building and the business, all these different things is so important with the planning, having a foot in the, what am I doing this for? And, with the annual cash flow at the same time is it's an interesting juggling act for sure.
Sure, you're right, Ryan. So everyone listening to us, when I say opportunity capital, everyone listening to us says, if I just had another 50, 100,000, I could buy a new x-ray machine. I could hire a new sales rep. We could get a new truck and we could make X. I could double or triple my money. So a lot of times what we do is we pull the money out of the walls of the property. We accelerate depreciation, simply change the method of accounting that they've been using. It's a simple process. Get all that done so that they can take advantage of this accelerated deductions and have more cash flow and go do that. And so, the recapture rate, it really doesn't matter what you're going to do because I need that money now. I've got an opportunity now. So you're absolutely right. It's this is the cheapest money that they'll ever borrow. Interest-free loans.
And it's interesting because we were talking about a potential client that we could work on together, and they're paying $1 million of on $1 million. They get $1 million of phantom income that they're paying taxes on. So right now, literally the cash flow is strapped to be able to help this family transition. So if we can accelerate a $10 million building and get, hundreds of thousands of dollars of actual cash in the next few years, we might be able to help fund the parents to help them pay their bills so we can help actually juggle the transition. So there's all these different things of, again, the depreciation recapture might be with certain things, but you now make something that wasn't possible because of looking at the bigger picture like that.
Exactly. You were talking about exit strategies in those scenarios. So when is this? I keep saying it's an interest-free loan from the government. When do you not have to pay the loan back? Where this truly would be free money, and that scenario is if the patriarch of the family, dad may own the buildings, and he's going to keep these buildings until he passes. Well, when dad passes, there's no recapture against that. The buildings go to his heirs. And as Jodi said, the value of the buildings are restated. They'll have to do an appraisal to give a fair market value, but there's no recapture against the depreciation that's been taken. The building gets a step up in basis, and we go do a cost segregation study on it again and accelerate depreciation again. So the cycle continues. So that's one strategy in passing that along to the kids. It could be gifted to the kids. When a building is gifted to the kids, there's no recapture, but it keeps its original basis. So there's no step up in basis. So now there's not many depreciation deductions for the kids, but there was no recapture against what's already been taken. So,
which is, I think, so interesting, David, because when you think about it, like having your estate attorney and your CPA and all these people talking is so important, because making that specific decision of whether we should gift it or whether we should put into a trust and then sell all these things. Because if you know that you're going to be making $500,000 or $1 million in profit this year, that even though gifting sounds better, you don't get the step up in basis, you don't get more write-offs, right? So, there's all this stuff they take into consideration information instead of just making a quick, off the hip decision on it.
I'm sure you have a lot of talented experts that can answer all those questions. Because I'm not wading into that pool because I'm going to drown pretty quickly.
Well, and let's take outside of the internal stuff. I know we had been talking about it. Is okay, crap. I'm going to be selling my building or my business, and I don't have time to do this or whatever. But I'm going to be selling it. How? Because one of the big challenges so most of the lower markets, so underneath 5 million in revenue, generally the building becomes a huge portion of the sale, and then the equity and the net worth of the individual. So if I've already kind of gone through and I might not have this opportunity, I think we had talked about it previously, is showing, because there's a big bridge, or there's a big gap between how much the buyer wants to pay and how much the person needs. So explain how your situation, you might be able to bridge some of the net proceeds of the payments because of what you're showing them.
So yes, Ryan, good question. So this can work for either the buyer or the seller. So if you're someone that's going to be buying a new property, have us run the numbers or the analysis, because if you might be able to just how you're going to negotiate this deal, because if you're buying a $2 million building and the first year you're going to save $200,000 of taxes, you might be able to give them that extra $10,000 and not blink an eye, because you're going to be getting a lot of money to be able to be successful the first year. If you're selling the building, this is a great motivator to show the buyer, because you want this much money and they're saying, oh, you're asking too much. But however, if you can show me $200,000, Jodi, did you know about this? And the buyer's like, no, I didn't have a clue. That could very much get you the price you want as the seller, and the buyer's happy. It's a good negotiating tool. Brokers, real estate people like it. Bankers love cost segregation as well, because their deal is they want to make the loan, right? So, but they want to get paid back or cure the loan, they say. So they know by doing a cost segregation study, at least I know you have $200,000. I'm going to get at least paid back the first couple of years. I know you're going to be good on the loan for me. So everyone that's kind of involved with a situation sees the advantages of doing a cost segregation. And for what you do for your clients and all your different specialists that you work with, you kind of do the whole picture. And that's where we just want to come in and be able to, or not us or somebody, they should really look at using the cost segregation benefit.
Well, I just think it's so interesting on the third party transaction, and even speaking from a couple of stories where let's say I'm going to sell and I haven't done this, and so most of this time these sellers don't realize like that the market's going to tell them what it's worth, and they usually are upset with the results.
Yeah.
So and again, if you're thinking if you're about to sell your business and your building combined, and you haven't done this, if you do this, then you can use this as a leverage and say, okay, sell or buy potential buyer, I don't know what your balance sheet looks like and how much profit you're going to make, or how you're getting your loan. But if you do this and you have this ability to take another 150 grand this year and extra cash, you might be able to land your bank loan. You might be able to pay a little bit more money. So it helps smooth out the negotiation. But to flip it, Jodi, like you were saying, we've got a client who's actually looking at having cost seg as part of their due diligence, because if they go in and because again, 99% of the people haven't done this, and they're going to, and regardless if they had, actually, to your guys' point, it's a new buyer anyways, or new owner, so they still could do it. They would you would be able to allow to do that, and then that person can look at their balance sheet and say, okay, I can actually afford this, and I can afford to do these certain things that I wouldn't have. So like you said, I might overpay a little bit, or I might be able to outbid someone else that's also bidding on it. So I think it's such an interesting buffer for cash flow in that whole transaction period.
Ryan,
Correct.
I'll tell you a story related to me by a big real estate broker. He says, I love cost segregation. He says, I had a big deal. They wanted 20% down. The client didn't have it to put down. He wanted to buy the building, just didn't have the cash flow. I said, do you have any other buildings? He says, yeah, I got 7. He says, CSSI did a study on his 7 buildings, got him $350,000 of cash flow. He was able to buy the building. He says the best thing is I got my commission because I got the deal done. So it is able to bring more cash into the transaction by leveraging this in not only this building but others that they may own.
And now I think it may be an interesting point, or you guys' experience and like some of the numbers, because if I'm the listener and any of the listeners are going to go, okay, well, this sounds way too good to be true. So now I think was it 20,000 studies you get, because you guys have been around for decades. What are the risks of this magic stuff happening, of me getting flagged and all of a sudden having to now be like underneath a microscope from the IRS? So what are some of the risks associated with that, or perceived ones?
Perceived is probably a very good word. So we've been around since 2001. We've done over 20,000, I think it's close to 22,000 now, studies. We have never triggered an audit. We defend our numbers. The IRS is very aware that we are an engineered-based company. We're a national company. As long as people file in the United States, we can help them. So our numbers they stand up. As David has said, if somebody's called for, let's say, payroll, audited for payroll, okay, now they're going to look at their depreciation. They see we've done it, we defend it, we're in and out. It's a calculated numbers, like they say. I always like to give the analogy, when you're in third grade and you brought the answer to your teacher and she said, "That's really good, Ryan, but show me your work." That's what the IRS wants to be able to see. Yeah. Who did it? How did they do it? Where did they do it? All the W's, and that's where we're able to show them this is the steps we took, and it's documentation, and they don't care what the number is, just how did you get it. So it is something to look at when you're looking at doing a cost segregation study. You do want to get somebody that's had, I guess, quite a bit of experience. CPAs typically do not do cost segregation studies, but they will apply our numbers.
Why don't the CPAs tell people about this? I mean, so if I'm a listener, like, how is it that I've never heard of this before, especially if it's been around for 20 years? So like, is it the CPA's fault? Is it some of the real estate? Like who's dropping the ball here?
I think the answer to that, what I found, because I as well as David, we do a lot of speaking to CPA groups. They are aware of it. They do know about it. They just, number one, they're not most of the time able to do the study. So I like to say they're river wide and inch deep. They have so many different things they need to know, and there's so many different clients, and there's so many different laws and regulations that are changing all the time. They're just doing all they can to stay afloat. Tons of respect for tax professionals out there. When they meet someone like us, as our particular company, we're independent. We don't file taxes, so we're not in competition with them. With the new laws coming out, though, they are wanting to do this for their clients because there's definitely competition amongst firms that they are using the strategy for their clients. Especially once they start using a company like us, they see the benefit. What you wouldn't want to do if you're a CPA is you wouldn't want another firm coming and talking to your top clients and saying, "Hey, has your company done a cost seg study?" and them not knowing anything about it. You don't want to be that CPA getting questioned by your clients why you didn't bring an advantageous tax benefit to them.
I agree. And I think, one of the biggest challenges that all these professionals have, which is why we're doing what we're doing, is that, you don't know the general context of the whole plan. It's all stuck in the owner's head, right? So, how would you know to bring it up? Because you don't know what they're doing. You're usually just having them file your taxes. So I see both sides too, because you just wouldn't know how to do that otherwise, or why you should do that, because there's too much risk in putting your foot out there if it doesn't fit.
If it doesn't fit, right. And so that's why a lot of times when we're dealing with these different firms or individual CPAs or whatnot, they understand why not run, we'll run the analysis. Maybe it's not going to work right for all of our clients, or maybe they're not, for whatever reason, don't want to do it, but at least I've brought it to their attention. And I think now the compliancy issue is going to be, it's going to be a lot more with this new tax laws that they're all new, like David had mentioned earlier, that nobody really knows what's going to happen because this is the first year of filing. So at least for this portion of it, they know that they're going to have defendable numbers by us doing a study for application.
Yeah, they're deferring the risk to you guys.
Right.
So as we're kind of, I mean, we've covered a lot, and I think this has been a lot of fun because it's very story driven. We've got a lot of examples, and if we're to circle back and say, okay, here's the one thing that I want to highlight and kind of leave you with, or if there's one thing that we might have missed before we wrap up, maybe to you first, David, and then to you, Jodi.
Okay.
Well, I think people should know if they're hiring a cost segregation specialist, that gives them executive sleep. So CPAs that say, hey, we'll do this for you. Well, ask them, how many have you done? How many have you defended? What's your methodology? It's not in doing it. It's in documenting how you did it and having the methodology. So you get executive sleep where if there's ever a question on this, and there probably never will be, but it's an independent third-party expert that's done your taxes and is able to defend those. That's versus your CPA that does not do this very often, not going to be able to work off of plans, not going to have an engineering-based attitude, not going to go there and take a couple hundred pictures of your property to document it. So, it's a great investment with a specialist. This is an area that requires tax specialty knowledge and experience. And as Jodi was saying, typically CPAs are general practitioners. They know a lot about everything, but this is where we have to get very specific. And so we can do it very cost effectively because we've perfected the method of doing that. So again, friends don't let friends overpay their taxes. So we hope to be able to help. Jodi?
How about you, Jodi? Anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think one thing we didn't kind of touch on, which I think we might, it's about cash flow. And people are probably wondering, what is the cost of doing this study? The ROI is always fantastic. Probably give me $1, I give you back 10, probably 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 1,000. I mean, but that's why you'll do the free analysis. It's a very easy process. We're an expense too. I should say that doing a cost segregation study, you get to expense part of what the cost is to have us do it. So that's even a more benefit.
Is there any chance that you could, I don't know if you feel comfortable giving a range or what the variables are. I mean, because if I'm one of the owners that you referred to, David, that is someone that is running from, I'll just say wolves, because that's what it feels like instead of dogs, like you said. But, is there a range, or, I'm assuming buildings and amount of all that stuff could be variables, but I don't know if you feel comfortable kind of throwing how you get to that determination.
Sure. So typically we see anywhere from $15 to $25 of cash flow for every dollar spent. Certainly, we have lots of examples where we got them 50 to 100. But if it's 15 to 25 bucks, that's a no-brainer as far as an investment to get an interest-free loan from the government. If it's down around 10, you have to have a really good reason to do this. Where are you going to invest that money, and how's it going to grow before you have to pay it back? So that's kind of my rule of thumb on those things. So as Jodi said, we'll take a look at that. We'll run the numbers for you, and we'll let you know what that number is so you can make a secure financial decision.
And I would leave it to that, just, because even though we'll walk out of a room of, tax professionals and they'll be like, well, what about this client that's got a fourplex? Would it work? It's like, really, if you have a building, just have us or some engineered-based company run a study or an analysis to see what your benefit's going to be. Like I say, a lot of times somebody may have an older building, but they've done a ton of work over the last 7 years and improvements to it. So that's a whole different ballgame. Again, if you lease a building, it has to be current tax year. And there's money, dollars in the dumpster, we call it. There's partial asset disposition, which we didn't get into. But so even if you're carrying a bunch of stuff out, there's value to that if we've done a cost segregation study for you. So I would just encourage anybody to look at this strategy, to work with, Ryan and your tax professional, and to see if it's something that would make sense for you.
So what's the best way to get in touch with both of you guys?
Probably for the service of your clients, they should probably contact me. My name is Jodi, Jodi. It's Nielsen's my last name, Nielsen. And my phone number is 651-210-1921. I'll say it again, 651-210-1921. And I'm with Cost Segregation Services Incorporated. We go by CSSI. I can spell out my email. It's long. Would you like me to do that?
We'll put it in the show notes so you don't have to do that, because most people are probably driving or running or cleaning the house.
That's what I figured. Yeah, it's a long one.
Well, thank you two so much for coming on. I appreciate how easily you broke this all down.
Ryan, thank you for having me.